The next day, the Arizona sun hung high like a burning eye, casting sharp, unrelenting light across the cracked earth of Willow Gap. Here, nothing stayed hidden for long. Not the fractures in the land, and certainly not the ones inside people. And the night before, Griffin's stockyard had stopped being just a place to sell wild horses. It had become a courthouse without a judge, a reckoning that reshaped the entire town. June Hartley, the girl who stepped out of silence and into legend, was now the center of whispers. Some called her the fatherless girl come for vengeance. Others murmured, the one riding like her mother's ghost had come back for the horse. People couldn't sleep. They kept replaying the moment Stormfall let her climb into the saddle. That look in his eyes, not of surrender, but of recognition. Meanwhile, Ezekiel Griffin had vanished from the ranch by dawn. No one saw him. The wooden gate behind his house remained closed. Smoke still curled from the chimney, but the towering man who once commanded an entire arena like a god had disappeared from view. Bo Griffin was the only one who showed up at the ranch that morning. He didn't speak. He just swept the stalls, brushed dust from old bridles, and wiped down a fading photo of his grandfather hanging in the tack shed. But there was something new in his eyes. Not the same boy who used to walk in Ezekiel's shadow. A man now, one who had begun to understand the difference between loyalty and blindness. That afternoon, a meeting was called at the Maricopa County Livestock Commission. The agenda: review of alleged animal abuse and unlawful ownership regarding Stormfall, a living asset previously removed from certified recovery programs. Sadie Monroe sat in the front row, notebook open, journal entries from Annie Hartley clipped beside her. Bo had let her photograph the original pages, and she'd done her job. Filed a story to the state paper, complete with images, quotes, and verified testimony. Now the commission, silent as they were, sat under the weight of a truth that moved faster than any desert storm. "We're not here to deliver judgment," the chairman said solemnly, "but there are things that have been ignored for far too long." When Sadie stepped out of that building, her wide-brimmed hat shadowed her face, but her eyes lit with a quiet fire. She knew the tide was turning, and Willow Gap was no longer a town that could look away. Back at Griffin Ranch, June sat beneath the old willow tree near the broken fence line. Stormfall stood nearby, not tied, not fenced, just there, as if he already knew where home was. She was sketching a map, not of borders, but of memory, marking places not by property lines, but by feeling. Bo arrived with an envelope. "The commission decided," he said. "They'll investigate Stormfall's status, and, if misconduct is proven, Griffin Ranch could be reclaimed." June looked up. "And if they take the land? They'll assign it to someone else," Bo said. "Could be you." She laughed, not out of joy. "I don't want to inherit anything from Ezekiel Griffin." "Not for him," Bo replied, voice soft. "For Stormfall, for your mother, for the people who made this place matter before it got stolen." Silence settled. Only the sound of Stormfall's tail brushing through the dry air and the willow leaves swaying like breath. The next day, the town buzzed with shock. Ezekiel Griffin had officially resigned for managing Griffin Stockyard. No press, no apology, just a short note taped to his office door. "I've spent too long looking only at what I wanted to see. It's time I listened to what I ignored." And then came the letter, hand-delivered to Bo's porch, addressed to June Hartley. She opened it slowly. The handwriting was sharp but shaky. "June, I don't write this for forgiveness, only to keep silence from being the last thing I say. Griffin Ranch, it was never mine, even if it bore my name. It belonged to the one who laughed in the wind, who sang to Stormfall, and who taught me a thing I spent my life denying: grace. If you choose to stay, this place is yours. Not because of blood, not because of legacy, but because you came back, because you rode into an old wound and didn't flinch." Ezekiel. June lowered the letter. Her heart didn't stir the way she thought it would. Not because it didn't matter, but because she no longer needed it to know who she was. Stormfall nuzzled her shoulder as if he too had read every word. That evening she led him to the western edge of the property, the field her mother once described, the wind-carried scents of cactus bloom and sunburned earth. She whispered, mostly to herself, "If I stay, it won't be for him." Stormfall lifted his head, ears perked. "It'll be for her," she said, "for us." She looked at the horse, not a symbol of anger anymore, but a bridge across time. She didn't need Griffin Ranch to prove anything. But if this land needed someone to stand tall on it again, she wouldn't walk away. Not this time. And as the sun tilted westward, casting long light over patches of dry grass, June turned back toward the barn with Stormfall by her side. Behind her, their shadows stretched across the cracked earth. Not shaped by anger anymore, but by a girl learning to walk on her own terms. In the days that followed, Willow Gap shifted quietly, like the land itself was waiting for a rain that hadn't come in years. No one spoke Ezekiel Griffin's name aloud, but it lingered, like wood smoke, in whispers over coffee counters, behind swinging saloon doors, in the way eyes followed June Hartley as she led Stormfall through the dusty stretch of Main Street. She didn't need to hear their words. The way they looked at her, part wonder, part respect, part unease, said it all. June didn't care. She avoided Main Street altogether. No stops at the old Samuel's store where she used to trail behind her mother. No stepping into the hair salon next to the church, the one Annie once joked was where gossip comes with a rinse and curl. Instead, she stayed near Beau Griffin's back barn, the only remaining piece of the Griffin legacy she trusted. Beau didn't ask questions. He cleared out an old stall for her, one big enough for Stormfall to move freely, unbothered. Every morning, June arrived before the sun breached the eastern ridge. She brushed Stormfall's coat, untangled his mane, whispered things only old friends or ghosts might understand. Stormfall no longer flinched when others approached. But he kept his distance, except for her. "You're just like Mama," she'd murmur, pressing a hand to his warm neck. "Don't need anybody, but still remember everyone who left." One afternoon, while the sun cut sideways through the tall pine trees, she heard a cane tapping against gravel. Turning, she saw an old woman walking slowly toward the paddock. Silver hair, leathered skin, hunched shoulders, but eyes as sharp as flint. "June Hartley," the woman said without introduction. "Name's Mavis Clay." June blinked. She knew the name. Her mother had mentioned it in hushed reverence. A woman who'd worked alongside Annie at the old Griffin Ranch, taught her how to mix herbal feed for horses, how to heal wounds without a vet. "My mama talked about you," June said softly. Mavis sat on a worn wooden bench by the fence, uninvited but welcome. She said if she ever had a daughter, that girl wouldn't be like anyone in this town. And if she came back, it wouldn't be for justice, it'd be for memory. June sat beside her, unsure what to say. Mavis reached into a canvas bag and pulled out a faded turquoise scarf. This was Annie's. She wore it every time she rode Stormfall. I held on to it. I never have had the heart to pass it on, but now's the time. She pressed it into June's hand. "It's yours." The fabric was soft, worn by time and wind. It still held the faint, earthy scent of her mother, bitterroot and sage. "Did Mama cry much?" June asked suddenly. Mavis smiled sadly. "No." But her eyes were never dry, like they forgot how to stop. That night, Beau came by carrying a thick manila envelope. "The town approved the transfer," he said. "Griffin Ranch." He signed it. No strings. June opened the envelope. Inside was a deed, notarized. Ezekiel Griffin's shaky signature scrawled at the bottom. No notes, no requests, no plea for forgiveness. Just her name, June Hartley, standing alone, no hyphen, no shared title. She looked up, unsure. "You think he did this because he was sorry?" Beau shook his head. "No, he did it because he knew there was nothing else left he could do that was real." The next morning, June took her map to the western field. She marked every broken fence post, every rusted trough, every stall that needed fixing. Stormfall followed her, free of reins, his hooves pressing fresh stories into the soil. Near the old well, she paused, drew a red circle. "We'll plant apples here," she whispered. "Mama liked apples in winter." Stormfall huffed softly, nudged her hand as if in agreement. June looked at him, a slow smile rising. "I'm not staying because of him." She said it again, firmer this time, like a vow. Not for Ezekiel Griffin, not for blood or land. Her hand brushed Stormfall's forehead. "For Mama, for what she left behind, for how you remember her better than any man ever promised to." That afternoon, she wrote in a weathered notebook, not a letter to her father, a letter to her mother. She told her about Stormfall, about Beau, about Mavis, about how the town looked at her, sometimes like she didn't belong, sometimes like they were beginning to see her for who she was. When the sky turned indigo, June sat beneath the barn awning, a warm cup of tea in her hands. Stormfall stood at the fence, head resting on a wooden beam, watching her. Some things don't need saying, they exist just by being near. Far off, at the edge of the road that curled toward the foothills, Ezekiel's cabin remained still. No one had seen him in days. But rumor had it, each evening a single yellow light flickered in the upstairs window, the old reading room. Beau once told her, "I think he sits there at night, not to watch you, just to listen to the sound of stormfall breathing." June didn't answer. But deep down she knew. Some wounds don't heal. You just learn to carry them. And she hadn't stayed to heal Ezekiel. She stayed to write a new chapter, with her mother's hands on the reins, with Stormfall's breath steady beneath her, and with the land finally speaking in its own voice again. Saturday morning broke clear, as if someone had wiped the dust from the sky over Willow Gap. Not a cloud, not a breeze, just a wide, polished canvas of blue stretching high above the quiet town tucked at the base of the hills. But that stillness wouldn't last long. From early light, people began to gather at what once was Griffin Stockyard, where wild horses were auctioned off like numbers, and where, not long ago, the truth had spoken through the eyes of a horse and the voice of a girl with no last name. The old Griffin Stockyard sign was gone. In its place, a new plaque, carved from sanded pine, read, "Hartley Stockyard." No one said it, but everyone knew. This wasn't another auction. There were no horses lined up behind fences, no bid cards hanging from necks. Just people, those who had spent lifetimes in Willow Gap. Old men in wheelchairs, children swinging on the fence rails, bakery women with flour still on their aprons, and farmers in sun-cracked boots who smelled of hay and grit. They weren't here to buy. They were here because of her. June Hartley stepped from behind the main barn, wearing a crisp white shirt and the turquoise scarf her mother once wore. Her brown hair was tied back, no makeup on her face, just that calm, resolute quiet in her eyes. Stormfall walked beside her. No bridle, no rope, no hand on his neck. His stride was confident, measured, as if he knew the grain of every board beneath his hooves, the smell of every hand that had once touched this place. As if he remembered where her mother once stood to watch him gallop for the first time beneath a setting sun. June stopped in the center of the yard, the same spot where Ezekiel Griffin had once barked prices, commanded attention, and mistaken noise for power. She stood there now, not to shout, but to speak, what silence had long held back. Lifting her head, her voice rang out, not loud, but strong. "I didn't call you here for business. I asked you to come so we could talk about what's finished and what needs to begin." No one interrupted. Even the wind paused. She stepped up onto the old auction platform, the one her father had used to lower the value of living creatures. Her hand brushed the rough wood, then she turned to face them all. "My name is June Hartley," she said, "daughter of Annie Hartley. A woman who worked here years ago, a mother who died when I was too young to understand why her eyes only cried at night." Her gaze swept the crowd, clear, unwavering. "Some of you might remember my mother. Some of you might have turned away when you saw her walking Stormfall back to the stables. Some of you may have known, and chose silence." She paused. "I didn't come here for justice. I came to build something real." Stormfall shifted his weight, the sound of his hooves soft in the sand. June placed a steady hand on his neck. This horse was labeled unfixable, untouchable, impossible, just like me, told I didn't belong here, that I shouldn't come back. From the back rows, Beau nodded. Sadie Monroe stood near the barn door, camera down, eyes full. "I won't change this name to forget what happened," June said. "I'm keeping it, Hartley, to remind everyone that you don't need someone's name to exist." She gently stroked Stormfall's forehead. "This horse was thrown away just like I was, but we're still here, still standing, and we're not going anywhere." There was no applause, but the sound of breathing, deep, visible, shared, filled the yard. The elderly wiped their eyes. Mavis Clay whispered, "Annie, your girl did it." Sadie scribbled notes with shaking hands, knowing no article would ever fully capture this moment. Someone in the crowd murmured, "That girl made a whole town hold its breath." And they were right. June stepped down from the platform, leading Stormfall between the benches. No one blocked her path. No one tried to follow. They just watched, with eyes that had changed. Ezekiel Griffin never appeared. But high on the western ridge, in the shadow of the old pine trees, people said they saw the flicker of a curtain in a cabin window. Maybe he was there, watching. Not as a father, But as a man forced to witness what he once denied walked past him, tall, unbent, and free. A week later, Willow Gap was quieter. Not because it had forgotten, but because it was learning to live with something new. Hartley Stockyard wasn't just for selling horses anymore. It had become a place where children learned to touch animals without fear, where mothers brought their sons and daughters to hear stories of a woman who once rode through pain without looking back. June spent her mornings in the fields. Stormfall always waited at the fence, eyes bright in the morning sun. Every step they took together was like a sentence written in dust and hoofbeats, about a place that once rejected them, now learning to welcome something different. Bo helped rebuild the old stalls. Sadie brought in a group of veterinary students to help rehabilitate the remaining wild Mustangs. And June, she redrew the map. Not with boundary lines, with memory. Where her mother had once laughed, where Stormfall used to sleep, where she dreamed of someday returning. One evening, she rode Stormfall through the Western Valley, along the bumpy road that led to the old pasture her mother once described. The sunset pulled their shadows long behind them, but this time it wasn't the shadow of someone forgotten. It was the shadow of someone who had touched silence and made it speak. She didn't need anyone to claim her. She didn't need a father to recognize her. She didn't need the town's approval. Because this land, through every step Stormfall took, through every breath of the wild grass, through every whisper of pine from the hills, had already told her she belonged here. Not because of blood, not because of name, but because she was June Hartley, the girl who made a horse remember and made a town finally face the truth. If you believe that some bonds don't need blood, only memory and loyalty, drop a 1 in the comments. If you've ever witnessed a moment of silence, suddenly say everything. Leave a 0 below. And if June and Stormfall's story made your heart skip a beat, don't forget to subscribe so you never miss the next journey, where truth, courage, and a single gentle touch can shake an entire town to its core. Willow Gap held its breath as Stormfall, the horse that once hospitalized 3 cowboys, stood still before a girl no one knew. No bridle, no whip, just a gentle touch and a gaze that seemed to summon the past. No one knew who she was, but when she whispered something into the horse's ear and Stormfall bowed his head, they all understood. Today wasn't just another auction. Today, the truth came home. The early summer wind swept across the scorched land of Willow Gap, trailing red dust and the whine of old chain links swaying from the roof of Griffin Stockyard's auction barn. Evening fell like a slow curtain across the Arizona sky, golden light pouring through the warped slats of weathered wood, streaking across the red sand below. The smell of old sweat, moldy hay, and something tenser than silence hung in the air like a thread stretched too thin. Ezekiel Griffin stood at the center of the auction floor, his alligator boots tapping against cracked planks, sunlight flashing off the oversized silver buckles cinched around his waist. He raised a hand like a preacher at the pulpit, eyes sweeping across the packed bleachers. Under thinning white hair and sun-worn skin, his face bore the smug confidence of a man whose authority had gone unchallenged for 3 decades. "Ladies and gentlemen," Ezekiel rasped, voice gravelly like whiskey poured over gravel, "I'm not selling a horse today. I'm wagering a legend." From behind the stall door, 2 young ranch hands pushed out a creature that froze the very air. A dark chestnut stallion, broad-chested and long-legged, with a white blaze running straight down the ridge of his nose. Fire smoldered in his eyes, like a volcano that hadn't yet erupted. This was Stormfall, the horse that had put 3 cowboys in the hospital during a spring training session last year. Stormfall didn't need an introduction. The scars along his flanks, the taut muscles in his frame, the angry huffs from flared nostrils, they said enough. He wasn't here to entertain. "This animal's not for the faint-hearted," Ezekiel warned, arms crossed. "I won't take a cent. 10 seconds on his back. If you stay on, he's yours. But make no mistake, this ain't a horse. This is a storm in a horse's skin." A ripple of nervous laughter spread through the stands. Some whistled. Others exchanged looks, waiting to see which fool would step up. Everyone knew what Stormfall had done, tossed cowboys from stall to lamppost. Some claimed he'd been beaten so badly he'd forgotten how to trust humans. Others whispered about a ghost in his gaze. Then, amid the murmurs, came a faint rustle. The sound of boot heels on dirt. A girl rose from the back row. No one knew her name. No one had time to ask why she was even at an auction usually reserved for seasoned wranglers. But in that moment, Stormfall's eyes landed on her, and they didn't rage. They didn't burn. They quieted. She wore a button cream shirt beneath a turquoise shawl. Her leather chaps were sun-worn, dusty. Her brown hair was tied back neat. She wasn't tall nor built like the rugged cowboys around her, but something in her eyes made the whole crowd go still. Ezekiel scowled. "Hey girl," he barked. "This ain't no show stage. Stormfall will kill you if you take one more step." She didn't answer. Her gaze never wavered. Step by steady step, she moved across the sandy floor. Each footfall left a small print, but everyone seemed to strike a nerve in the air around them. "My name is June Hartley," she said, voice soft but firm as forged steel. "I'm not here to perform, I'm here to remember." A buzz swept the crowd. Some chuckled, some squinted. The name Hartley rang no bells. But the way Stormfall froze when he heard it silenced everyone. June stopped 3 steps from him, no outstretched hand, no thrown rope, just stood there, the sunset wind tugging gently at her shirt. Stormfall snorted, stomped, kicking sand around his hooves, but didn't retreat, didn't charge. Ezekiel stared hard, eyes locked on the stallion's legs, his knuckles whitened on the rail. Stormfall gave a low grunt, and then he stepped forward, 1 step. Toward her. A swallow echoed behind them. Someone whispered, "What the hell?" June raised her hand, not fast, not slow, palm open, catching the sunlight like an invitation. Stormfall sniffed, then bobbed his head. His skin twitched like a memory had just grazed it, a memory of someone else. Ezekiel blinked, slowly. June took another step. This time, Stormfall didn't flinch. He stayed still, and in that thunderous silence something shifted. "She knows that horse," Bo Griffin, Ezekiel's cousin, murmured from behind the bench row. His eyes were wide. "No way." Ezekiel turned to him but said nothing. Inside him, a long-buried crack, like the splinter in the auction stage, was starting to shift. June reached for Stormfall's chest. No bridle, no whip, no fear. Just a palm on his warm hide. His heartbeat thudded beneath her hand, but he didn't throw her off. Sunlight poured down her shoulders and across the scene Willow Gap would never forget. No more laughter. No more words. Only silence and a question hanging in the dust-lit air. Who is this girl? And why does this horse remember her so clearly? Stormfall stood motionless on the sandy arena floor like a sculpture carved from desert wind. Fierce, silent, and holding something inside no one dared to name. Only June Hartley, with her hand resting gently on his warm neck, seemed to understand. As if every scream buried deep within him, every injustice stacked upon his back over the years, was melting into a memory only the two of them remembered. In the bleachers, a hushed ripple of unease moved through the crowd like a silent tide, capable of cracking the wooden foundation beneath them. No one stirred. No one dared speak. A wild horse being tamed not by leather or lashes, but by the mere presence of a stranger. That was something even the folks of Willow Gap, well-versed in the oddities of the wild, couldn't explain. Bo Griffin, Ezekiel's younger cousin, stepped quietly from the shadows behind the stalls, hands dusty with straw, eyes wide with disbelief. He had fed Stormfall for the last 2 years, had been thrown over the fence by that same stallion, nearly cracking ribs. He had never seen the horse let anyone near him, let alone this still. Swallowing hard, he rasped, "No way. She knows him. She really does." From the other side of the arena, a woman's voice floated in, soft as a breeze. "This moment can't go unnoticed." It was Sadie Monroe, independent journalist for the Willow Watch. Young, sharp-eyed, with sandy brown hair tied high and an old camera hanging from her neck. She hadn't come to witness a sale. She'd followed a tip about Griffin Stockyard hiding something about Stormfall. But now, she knew she was watching something far more important. Ezekiel Griffin remained frozen, his face like stone. One hand clenched the wooden rail of the auction platform, knuckles drained of color. The horse he'd counted on to be his showstopper, his weapon of legend, was now lowering its head to a girl no one could name, gentle as a lost child finally coming home. June slowly drew her hand back. She didn't turn to the crowd. Quietly she circled around and reached for a saddle resting on the rail. A worn leather one. No silver studs, no fancy tooling, just real hide, solid and cared for like a relic. Stormfall didn't flinch. He simply watched her, as if every motion, Every tug of strap and cinch had once been a rhythm his body remembered. Bo approached Ezekiel, voice low. "This horse, he's never acted like this. Not with anyone. There's something familiar." "Shut it," Ezekiel growled, not turning his head. "You don't know a damn thing." Sadie raised her camera but lowered it again. She knew this couldn't be captured in a single frame. This had to be told. Breath by breath, touch by touch, stare by unspoken stare. June finished securing the saddle. She looked into Stormfall's eyes. "You still remember, don't you?" She whispered, no louder than a breeze. "The field, the sunsets when Mama rode you, the smell of dry grass and her voice singing." Stormfall shuddered, but not from fear. From something deep inside, coming alive again. She grabbed the reins and moved to his left side. Stormfall shifted slightly, then settled. No resistance. June placed her boot in the stirrup, swung up smoothly. For a moment, the arena felt sunken below the earth. No sounds, no breaths, just the soft creak of saddle leather, the faint snort of a once wild stallion, and the calm, impossible presence of a girl riding like she'd never forgotten. Stormfall hesitated, then began to move. One step, then another. No buck. No fight. Ezekiel swallowed, sweat beading his brow. No way. No way in hell. This girl wasn't just riding the horse. She understood him. Every tug, every breath. No cowboy, not even the seasoned ones from Texas to Wyoming, had ever come close. Stormfall snorted, then reared slightly. Testing. The crowd gasped. June leaned forward, balance fluid as if she were part of his spine. When the hooves hit the sand again, she was still, hands steady, back straight. A gust of wind swept through, scattering old doubts like dust. "She's not guessing," Sadie whispered, eyes blazing. "She knows his every move, like she's lived with him before." She raised her camera again, this time to capture Ezekiel's face, now drenched in a feeling far stranger than fear or anger. Recognition. June guided Stormfall into a soft circle, like leading a child across a path of forgotten grass. He didn't bolt. He didn't roar. He just moved, beside her, as if reunited with an old friend. From the shadows beneath the old cottonwood tree behind the barn, an elderly woman stood watching. Mavis Clay, the one who'd raised Annie Hartley when she was just an orphaned girl. Her eyes welled. She knew that riding posture. She knew that turquoise scarf. She knew this wasn't a miracle. It was blood, not by name but by root. And at that root, a horse was whispering its welcome. "Welcome home, little girl." The one who carried a whole field of memory in her chest, riding back not for glory, but for truth. Inside Griffin Stockyard, the air had thickened like the sky before a storm. All of Willow Gap seemed to be holding its breath as June Hartley sat firm on Stormfall's back. No one dared speak, not because they lacked words, but because words had become useless when truth came riding in on an old saddle and a gaze that could cut through forgotten time. Stormfall moved slowly. Not like a beast broken, but like a creature remembering how to walk beside someone worthy. Each hoof that sank into the sand echoed in the chests of those watching. People who'd seen this stallion rage, demolish fences, fling cowboys like rag dolls. Now, Stormfall was nothing but focus. The muscles under his chestnut coat moved with grace, tendons flexed beneath the glint of barn light slicing in through warped roof boards, casting a halo around June like fate itself was watching. She said nothing. She simply leaned forward, resting her cheek against the side of his neck, as if listening to a story told only in the rhythm of a horse's pulse. Anyone who's ever ridden knows, commands don't pass through reins, they pass through trust. And trust was the one thing Stormfall had never given, until now. She tugged gently on the reins. Stormfall turned, and now he faced Ezekiel Griffin, the man standing like a statue, his stare locked by a memory he'd tried to bury for years. June didn't raise her chin, but her voice carried far enough for everyone to hear. "I didn't come here to win a challenge, Mr. Griffin." The crowd stirred. Some gripped their hats, some shook their heads in disbelief. Bo Griffin stood not far off, still dusty from the stables, unable to tear his gaze from the girl who rode like she'd been born to it. June's eyes never left Ezekiel. "I came to face the man who walked away from his own blood." A silence heavy as stone settled over the auction grounds. Wind passed through the rafters like it had lost its breath. Stormfall stopped, ears pricked forward. He was listening. Somehow, the horse understood, and his eyes turned to Ezekiel. Not wild, not soft, but full of judgment. Ezekiel smirked, but it lacked life. I don't know what you think you're talking about. June arched a brow. You know exactly what I'm talking about. She spoke slow, each word falling like a nail into aged wood. Annie Hartley, the woman who worked this ranch over 20 years ago, the one you promised to take away from this town, then left behind when she was pregnant. Gasps trickled through the audience. Sadie Monroe, the young reporter, fumbled for her notebook. Her camera thudded softly against her coat. She didn't blink. This wasn't just news, this was reckoning. Ezekiel stayed silent, but his clenched jaw, his twitching hands, they all spoke in his place. He knew that girl, and he knew that horse. June reached down, her hand gliding along Stormfall's back. Her voice dropped, but gained no less steel. Stormfall wasn't just your horse. He was a witness. Mama trained him when he was still just a foal. He followed her voice like a child follows its mother. And when she died, you locked him up, tossed him aside like everything else she left behind. Stormfall lifted a hoof and stamped the ground once. He didn't know the words, but he heard the truth in her voice. It was a language that didn't need translation. Bo stepped forward, cutting the silence. In his hand he held a weathered leather notebook, spine frayed and corners curled. I found this in the wooden chest behind the old stalls, he said, his voice cracking. It's Annie Hartley's journal. She wrote about the pregnancy, about a man named Griffin, and about Stormfall. June turned, eyes trembling. She didn't know Bo, but sometimes truth finds its way to the people ready to carry it. Bo looked from Ezekiel to June. I don't know the whole story, but I believe you. Ezekiel clenched his jaw. No one asked you to come here. You dug up what should have stayed buried. June met his eyes again, softer now, not with pity, but with something steadier, older, like the desert itself. I didn't come to dig, she said. I came to look you in the eye, from the same saddle my mother once rode. Stormfall shivered beneath her. The entire stockyard felt it like the ground had shifted. Sadie lowered her camera. She didn't need more photos. The story was clear now. People in the stands began to sink into their seats. No clapping, no shouting, just silence, long, deep, and cracking through the auction floor like a fault line finally given a name. And there in the quiet stood a horse watching the shadow of a man he once obeyed, and on his back, a girl who had carried her mother's memory, riding back not for vengeance, but for a name. As the late sunlight burned red against the roof of Griffin's stockyard, the murmurs from the bleachers faded like the wind retreating from a canyon. All that remained were the soft exhales of Stormfall, the quiet creak of saddle leather, and a silence stretched long and deep, like a wound left unstitched. June Hartley still sat atop the stallion. She said nothing more. She didn't have to. Once truth is spoken, there's no more room for doubt or pity. She simply sat, living proof of a life no one had wanted to acknowledge. No birth certificate, no father's name, just the name her mother gave her between shifts at Griffin Ranch so many years ago. Stormfall tossed his head lightly, his dark mane catching the last gold of the day. Beneath his skin lay years of abandonment, of confinement, of being treated like a thing no one dared approach. But when June placed her hand on his neck, something inside him stirred, not the instinct to strike, but to recognize and protect. Bo Griffin sat quietly on the steps of the stable, fingers still wrapped around the old journal once penned by Annie Hartley, June's mother. Faded ink, yellowed pages, water stains where tears had likely fallen. These spoke louder than any courtroom testimony. Sadie Monroe, perched by the fence rail, notebook half filled in her lap, eyes locked on the slight figure in the saddle. She wasn't just witnessing a story, she was watching something bigger. A fragment of truth, buried beneath dust, now rising by its own will on the back of a girl who carried it in her blood. In the center of the auction yard, Ezekiel Griffin stood motionless. No longer the towering man of power, but a cracked husk trying to mask a soul that had denied its own kin too long. He mumbled. She never said anything. Annie never told me you were mine. June stepped down from the stirrup, still holding the reins. Her eyes didn't flicker. She didn't need to, she replied. Because you knew. From the moment Stormfall let me touch him, you knew. Ezekiel turned his face away, but it wasn't defiance, it was surrender. For a brief second, like smoke curling past a front porch screen, a memory returned to June. The dry summers of Nevada. a single-wide trailer on the edge of the woods where she and her mother lived among creaky floorboards and late bills. Every evening, Annie would take her out to the field, the one place she seemed to breathe freely. They'd walk barefoot through wild grass, her mother carrying a scrap of old saddle leather, the only thing she kept from Griffin Ranch. "Stormfall was everything to me," Annie once said. "He understood me better than any man ever did." When June asked who her father was, Annie never answered, just stared into the rust-red horizon where abandoned railroad tracks cut the earth. Now, those memories bloomed sharp and clear as she walked toward Bo, the man who had changed everything with a simple gesture, opening a dusty wooden box. Bo stood when she approached. He handed her the journal without a word. June flipped it open. The first page read, "If one day my daughter reads this, know this, I once loved, and you are the best thing I ever had." At the bottom, a faint smudge, ink or tears, June couldn't tell, but her heart tightened. She looked up at Bo. "Why did you keep this?" "Didn't keep it," Bo said. "Just didn't dare read it. Not until I saw Stormfall bow to you." Ezekiel stepped forward, his coat rustling in the breeze. He no longer looked like the man who used to fill the stockyard with barked commands. His eyes met June's, nothing left to mask the years. "I loved your mother," he said, voice dry as cracked dirt. "But when she said she was pregnant, I panicked. I chose the road that made breathing easier." "And you chose wrong," June replied, steady as stone. "Because every step I took growing up, my mother cried alone." Sadie still hadn't moved. She knew. This was the eye of the storm. Every question, every rumor that had haunted this town about the girl with no father and the woman who once worked Griffin Ranch, they were being answered not with legal documents, but with the bitter silence of a man and the steady voice of his daughter. Ezekiel lifted a hand as if to speak, then let it drop. He turned, walked toward the stables, and vanished behind the wooden beams. Bo placed a hand gently on June's shoulder. "You don't have to forgive him." "I didn't come to forgive," she replied. "I came to reclaim what should have always belonged to my mother, truth." Stormfall stepped forward, nudging her arm as if to agree. "I don't carry his name," June said, her gaze tracking Ezekiel's fading silhouette. "But my blood, my breath, they're hers. And Stormfall, the horse he threw away, is the only one who never forgot me." She turned to Bo, offering a faint smile. "Some things don't need paperwork to prove. They live in memory, in breath, in the way someone looks at you." Bo nodded, and Stormfall just proved it in front of the whole damn town. As sunset wrapped Willow Gap in amber light, June led Stormfall out of Griffin's stockyard. She didn't look back, but the sound of the stable door closing behind her rang like the last bell of a buried past. No applause followed, no parting words. Only a few lingering eyes watched her go. This girl who carried no last name, no legacy, only the look in her mother's eyes and the breath of a wild horse, reminding the world that some truths don't stay buried forever.